A U.S. ground invasion into Syria seems imminent. U.S. generals have staged forces surrounding Damascus. In February, U.S. generals met with Lebanese leaders to discuss military aid. Well, that was a good cover to place U.S. troops on Syria's border in the west of Damascus. The independent news source already happened and uncovered April 2nd that 2 ARC ships that had been loaded with U.S. military equipment in Romania that was bound for Beirut, Lebanon. This ship of military arms, under the cover of military aid to Lebanon, no doubt, will be staged for an assault on Damascus from the west. Israel has troops in the Golan currently involved in exercising, making for the tense situation after having already several confrontations with Syria over the past few months, including their assault 2 weeks ago. If the U.S. conducts a strike in Damascus, it puts Israel in a prime position to either assist or to protect their own interests in the Golan. The U.S. and their allies have obviously planned for several months to surround Damascus in this very clandestine way. You've already heard me report on this, but there's about 1,000 U.S. troops in Syria right now as we speak. Trump also sent 2,500 troops to Kuwait in readiness for missions in Syria and Iraq, and that was back in early March of this year. The U.S. military is deploying 2,500 troops from the 82nd Airborne Division to Kuwait with a declared goal of taking part in operations against Islamic State and previously ISIS and ISIL, both in Syria and Iraq, according to the Army Times. On Thursday, an unnamed military official told Reuters the Pentagon wants to have rapid deployable Kuwaiti-based force as part of the ongoing change in the U.S. strategy to defeat ISIS. Lieutenant General Joseph Anderson, the U.S. Army's Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations, told House members on Wednesday that the additional troops will be postured there to do all things Mosul, Raqqa, and all in between, as cited by the Army Times, referring to the Islamic State's 2 main bastions in Iraq and Syria, respectively. It's pretty funny, but we have Trump's lapdog, Alex Jones, is actually even barking out about this, which it is wrong. And if you are in the... if you want to know truth and you want to do what's right by humanity, you're not going to stand for this shit. That's just plain and simple. Now, we got to go and remember, this is a multi-layered agenda. One of the main agendas that I see there, besides just taking power and taking resources and control of everything, is this murdering of the Aryan race, which that actually all falls in line with the Iranian plateau. People need to wake up to this fact. It's going on throughout Europe. It's actually going to be jumping off here at home in the U.S., because what they're doing there, they do plan on turning in on the United States, the American people. All right. What I see happening next is after they get through with this bullshit, they'll go straight into Iraq. As soon as any kind of hot anything goes, by the way, China and Russia are getting ready to dump the dollar right now as we speak. And so all these things colliding together, I see martial law, a global economic collapse, which has been planned, and their world war, so that they can run and use that as cover for their bullshit. And just to add a little snippet, Philip Giraldi, a former CIA officer and director of Council for National Interest, says that the military and intelligence personnel intimately familiar with the intelligence says that the narrative that Assad or Russia did this chemical weapons is a sham. This is a classic case of a false flag instigated by the CIA and carried out by Saudi Turkish planes to blame Assad. Western prostitute media propagated and hammered into Westerners' indoctrinated brains the same lie as in 2003 when East Ghouta chemicals attacks were killing children to justify U.S. humanitarian military intervention. Then, as today, the Washington assault was to follow quickly before the lie could be discovered, but Mr. Putin intervened and warned Washington not to attack, or else course, he hasn't done anything yet. And insisted on an intervention. Russian naval facility in Tartus and airbase in EMINENT, Syria, I butchered that one, were ready to counter U.S. attack. Later it was proven beyond any doubt that the attack did not come from Syria's army, nor was it ordered by Mr. Assad. It was indeed once more a false flag carried out by the Syrian opposition, the so-called rebels, but in truth the Western-paid terrorists, with the purpose to blame Mr. Assad and to justify the regime change planned since 2009, since well before the CIA instigated the start of the 2011 so-called civil war. So, we can sit there and infight with each other, or we can unite and say fuck off with this stuff and fuck off with this Rothschild plan. Wardo out.
And from now the end begins. War is on the horizon from yesterday's date. And by the way, today is February 13th, the day before Valentine's Day. If you have not bought your wife or husband a Valentine's gift, you should do so. Saudis announced plans to invade Syria as Russia warns of world war. Russia will have no choice but to use tactical nuclear weapons to defend Syria once a ground invasion begins within 18 days, as 350,000 troops, 20,000 tanks, 2,450 military planes, and 460 helicopters from 25 countries are massing in northern Saudi Arabia. Syria has warned any aggressor entering the country will go home in wooden coffins. Russia has said any country sending ground troops into Syria without permission will be considered a declaration of war. Yikes. Russia warned of a new world war starting in Syria on Thursday after a dramatic day in which Gulf states threatened to send in ground forces. Will there be an economic collapse the same time the world war starts? I don't know. The burden of Damascus. Behold, Damascus is taken away from being a city, and it shall be a ruinous heap. Isaiah 17:2. In the Bible, a whole lot happens in around the nation of Syria, both historically and prophetically. In the King James, Syria is mentioned 75 times in 71 verses, and its capital city of Damascus is mentioned 60 times in 5 verses. In 2016, the eyes of the whole world are about to be once again focused on this same region of the globe.
The Independent has warned of Saudi Arabia's sending of ground forces into Syria, saying this will have immense ramifications for the country's civil war and the wider region. The Saudi announcement comes at a time when prospects for peace have faded with the collapse of the Geneva talks, and conflict has intensified with regime forces attempting to encircle Aleppo backed by heavy Russian airstrikes. The already sour relationship between Russia and Turkey, backers respectively of the Syrian regime and rebels, has also worsened. Ankara accuses Moscow of being complicit in trying to impose a starvation siege on Aleppo, while the Russians claim the Turks are planning to invade Syria. The Independent added that any Saudi troops going into Syria will find themselves at the center of a highly combustible situation.
Well, there you go. Saudi Arabia announced yesterday that their decision to send troops into Syria is final and irreversible. The military spokesman also said that the Islamic military alliance will take effect within 2 months. Russia issued a stark warning of the potential consequences. The Americans and our Arab partners must think well. Do they want a permanent war? Its Prime Minister Dmitry Medvedev told Germany's Handelsblatt newspaper in an interview due to be published on Friday but released on Thursday night. Russia-Saudi troop deployment to Syria, declaration of war.
Russia says Saudi Arabia's proposed troop deployment in Syria could be regarded as a declaration of war. The head of the State Duma Committee, Pavel Krashenikov, says Riyadh has to get official permission from the Syrian government before any military operation in the Arab country. But unlike Russia, the United States has welcomed the Saudi offer to send ground troops into Syria. The U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter says the offer will be discussed with his Saudi counterpart in Brussels next week. Saudi Arabia has announced it is ready to join the so-called U.S.-led coalition against Daesh. Damascus accuses Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and Qatar of funding and arming anti-Syria terror groups, including Daesh. Speaking to Press TV, political analyst Ibrahim Musawi earlier said he believes that Saudi Arabia's announcement to send ground troops into Syria is just propaganda to show that it is against Daesh terrorists.
I believe this is a kind of propaganda, this is a kind of advertisement to the Saudi forces. We know very well that there is a growing persuasion, there is a growing conviction on the West and all over the world that the Saudis are very close, and they are the ones who are supporting Daesh and the Takfir groups. They represent an incubator for them. They give them arms, they give them money, they funnel all kinds of support to them in order to kill in Syria, to kill in Iraq and in different places, and even in Lebanon. So maybe they want to make a kind of propaganda to say that they are against Daesh. All are associating Daesh with Saudi Arabia. Maybe this is a move only to try as much as they can to detach themselves from this campaign, true campaign, and the accusations that have all foundations, that have full base, that the Saudis are supporting Daesh.
Well, there you go. The accusations that the Saudis are supporting the Daesh. It would be impossible to win such a war quickly, especially in the Arab world where everybody is fighting against everybody. All sides must be compelled to sit at the negotiating table instead of unleashing a new world war. Russia will have no choice but to use tactical nuclear weapons to defend Syria once a ground invasion begins within 18 days, as 350,000 troops, 20,000 tanks, 2,400 military planes, and 460 helicopters from 25 countries are massing in northern Saudi Arabia. Syria has warned any aggressor entering the country will go home in wooden coffins. Russia has said any country sending ground troops into Syria without permission will be considered a declaration of war. Thousands of soldiers from regional countries are set to participate in what is being called a military exercise, media reports say. Saudi media said some 350,000 forces from Persian Gulf Arab states and a number of other countries will take part in a Saudi-led military maneuver in the area of Hafir al-Batin in northern Saudi Arabia. In addition to the massive troop buildup, some 540 warplanes and 20,000 tanks and 460 helicopters will also participate in the exercise dubbed North Thunder. The exercise is scheduled to last 18 days, during which the airspace over northern Saudi Arabia will be closed.